Great. Hi, everyone. How's it going today?
Good.
Doing good. My name is Danny. We are going to be talking today about occupational safety and alcohol within the workplace. So just to open things up a little bit, we're going to go ahead and take a few moments and talk with the people around you. And you're going to go ahead and talk about the negative effects of alcohol and what you think the difference is between alcoholism and alcohol abuse. And that's something we're going to be covering a little bit later on. So go ahead and take this next minute or so, talk with the people around you, get some general ideas going. We'll come back and we'll have a discussion with it all together. Sound good?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, go ahead and start.
I think just like the negative effects of alcohol, especially when it comes to the workplace, is like affecting your ability to do your job in like an effective and like progressive manner, like not only for you but for like your coworkers, your employer, like the workplace in general. So just not being able to like fulfill your duties and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think also alcohol can really affect a lot of your relationships, both personal and professional, because I don't think your mind is really on anyone but yourself, to be completely honest, when you are drinking.
Yeah.
So.
Take another like 20 seconds or so, finish up some final thoughts.
Love, what are you thinking? Yeah, absolutely.
All right, you ready to bring it back in?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so opening on out, go ahead and say one thing that you found interesting or one interesting thing that you thought of yourself in relation to alcohol and the negative consequences as abusing it comes from. So go ahead and open it out. Anyone who wants to share first?
Yeah, I think Adrian had a really good point with talking about how it's really hard to do your job or focus on any of your work responsibilities when you're drinking, which I completely agree with. So, yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah, I liked how she was talking about how like when you're intoxicated, like you're not really focused on anyone or anything but like yourself, and like you're like you're only like you're within your own head, like your needs, your desires, whatever. So you're not really going to be focused on anything or anyone.
Good. No, and those are some of the big prominent ideas that I heard while I was walking around a little bit. So we have a good discussion going, and we're going to use what we just talked about as a basis for the material that we're going to cover. So keep all of those ideas in mind. Those are some really good thoughts, and we're going to go ahead and dive into that a little bit here. So what is the difference between alcoholism and alcohol abuse? Now, these are two terms that sound very similar. However, there is a difference between the two. And in the context of a workplace setting, we're going to be going into how these two things affect different employees in an occupational scenario. So looking at alcoholism, we define that as a strong craving for alcohol. Now, when I'm talking about craving here, I'm talking about an absolute need to have alcohol in your system in order to function in your day-to-day activities. So in relation to your workplace setting, you need alcohol in order to sustain yourself and help yourself have enough energy throughout your day-to-day tasks and throughout your workplace and the people you interact with your employers, with anyone that you supervise, or with your coworkers as well. So that's what we're talking about when we say craving for alcohol. It's almost a necessity. You can't do without it. On top of that, we're also talking about continued use despite repeated physical, psychological, or interpersonal problems. Now, with someone with alcoholism, it becomes very difficult to completely stop drinking altogether just because there's negative consequences. And it's no surprise, it's a very common piece of knowledge to know that alcohol does not bring good things when you continually abuse it over time. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about alcoholism. However, these negative effects are not always enough to help someone quit, especially if they are an alcoholic. On top of that, we also have the inability to limit drinking. So it's one thing to have maybe a few beers while you're out with some friends. Maybe you're having one or two drinks while you're out on a holiday party or maybe a different work event or something like that. However, when we talk about limiting drinking, people who have alcoholism or who are alcoholics have a very difficult time understanding that concept of limiting themselves to one or two drinks. They actually don't have that perceived notion of when is too much or when to stop, and it becomes very difficult for them to stop. So moving on with that, go ahead and keep those bullet points in mind. We're going to go ahead and talk about alcohol abuse. So when we're talking about alcohol abuse, we're talking about a failure to fulfill major responsibilities within the workplace or day-to-day activities. Now, that also correlates to that second bullet point right here where it talks about legal problems in So we're talking about how alcohol can cause not only legal issues, but problems within your day-to-day activities as well. Now, moving on a little bit before we talk about the difference between alcoholism and alcohol abuse, we're talking also about continued alcohol use despite ongoing relationship problems, especially when it comes to a workplace setting. So with your peers, with your supervisors, and with anyone that you supervise. Now, when we're talking about alcohol abuse, the difference between alcoholism and alcohol abuse is that alcohol abuse is something that maybe happens 1 or 2 times, not as frequently. When we're seeing alcohol abuse on a day-to-day basis, and like we said before with the alcoholism, the craving for alcohol to push you through your workday, that's when it turns to someone becoming an alcoholic rather than having a binge episode or an alcoholic abuse time during the night or anything in relation to that. Do you have any questions on any of that material? So alcoholism is defined as?
Isn't it craving?
Yes, craving, perfect. That's the word I'm looking for. And we're also talking about alcohol abuse. So what would we define alcohol abuse as?
Negatively affecting your relationships with others, especially in the workplace.
Good, perfect. All right, so we're right on that right track. And moving on a bit, we're going to take it to our writing activity. So keeping all of that knowledge in mind, as well as that group discussion that we had in the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and pass out some papers right here. And I want you to go ahead and take the next minute or so and answer these few questions. So in your own words and with your own ideas, I want you to go ahead and think about how these definitions relate to your own, especially in the context of what we talked about in the beginning discussion. On top of that, go ahead and answer how many average-sized drinks would you consider to be binge drinking? At what point do we consider that over the top or past a normal amount of consuming alcohol? And the final thing I want you to focus on is this bullet point right here. What is the biggest difference between alcohol abuse and alcoholism, which is something we've really been talking about in the past few minutes. And if you can, I want you to go ahead and relate that to a workplace setting as well. So again, take the next minute or so, write down your thoughts. We'll go ahead and come right back together and we'll talk about what we wrote down. If you need to reference the PowerPoint at any time, the questions are right up here in front if you can't remember them. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me as well. We still have plenty of time. Take the next few seconds, go ahead and wrap up your thoughts. Jot down anything else that you have an idea about. We're all good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go ahead and bring it right back in together. So we'll go ahead and start at the far end. What do you think is the definition that we gave matching with your own definitions of alcohol abuse and alcoholism?
I feel like I didn't necessarily have my own definitions before because I thought that alcoholism was alcohol abuse in general. You used to abuse alcohol and you're dependent on it. So I think now that I've learned that there are two differences, especially when it comes to alcoholism as a craving versus and a dependency versus just maybe a binge drinking episode or what you were saying earlier
Good.
about just possibly using it.
Perfect. Anything to add on?
No, I think that pretty much covers mine. Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So moving on to that second part, what do we consider binge drinking? Anyone can go ahead and jump in whenever.
So I just kind of guessed on the number of drinks. I'm not entirely sure, but I was thinking around 3 drinks for women and 4 for men.
Good. Excellent.
I was just thinking somewhere just above the legal limit is in your system is is binge drinking.
Good. And that's something we'll also be covering a little bit later as well. So moving on to that final bullet point. So what's the biggest difference between alcohol abuse and alcoholism? I know I've asked this a few times.
Alcoholism is the craving and the dependency. Abuse is affecting your workplace relationships and just relationships with your peers in general.
Ding, ding, ding. Perfect. Anything to add on?
No, you got it, girl.
Perfect. All right. So any questions on anything we just covered?
Super clear.
Super clear? Good. Awesome. So it sounds like we got those definitions down really well. That concludes our portion of the teaching segment. So again, we talked today about occupational safety and alcohol within the workplace. What is the difference between alcoholism and alcohol abuse, and how can that affect someone in their day-to-day activities at work? So thank you all so much for coming today. Again, my name is Danny. If you have any questions for me at the end of class, feel free to go ahead and ask. go ahead and leave your seats right up here by the computer and the PowerPoint. And if you have no questions for me, then I will see you again tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.